Before we take roll, just some housekeeping things for everybody. For those who are on Zoom and want to testify, it's probably easiest for us if you use the raise your hand function. Am I right, Amanda? Okay. We'll call for you to do that, and then Amanda will admit you. And that. So as you keep decorum, please address the chair. Wait to be recognized by the chair for your answers to questions, and we'll keep it civil. Biggest crowd I've seen in transportation in quite a while, so I'm a little concerned. I didn't think we had anything that interesting going on. Couple things for the committee. When you get the Outlook calendar invites for these meetings, it looks like it comes from House Education, and that's just a quirk in our system. So don't dump them in trash or anything. Those are coming from Diana, and because she does both education and transportation. And I think they set her up first with education, so we have that issue. So please accept those. We've already been asked for interim topics. So if you have any, please start letting me know. So, and I guess we'll have remedial timekeeping classes on what 15 minutes means. So, and then presenting a bill on the floor, please know what the references say, that are referenced to some of our bills, and try to anticipate some of the questions. So with that, Diana, take roll, please.
Okay, Representative Baker. Here. Representative Brown.
Excused, he is ill.
Representative Burt. Here. Representative Henderson.
Here.
Representative McGuire.
Here.
Representative Obermuller.
Here.
Representative O'Hearn.
Here.
Representative Stivar.
Present.
Chairman Burkhart.
Here. So we have 4 bills to take up today, and hopefully we can get through all 4 of them. I'm not going to limit debate or anything else, but we have other bills, and I'd like to see all the bills referred to us get through this session. I know we have, I think, 2 or 3 more that'll come up next week, and anything we don't do today will carry over. I'm taking these out of numerical order, mainly to combine departments so that they can speak to their bill and leave if that's what they wish to do, although you're welcome to stay too. So with that, we'll take up House Bill 16, Military Assistance Trust Fund Authorized Uses. General Porter, Major Maury, if you'd walk us through the bill, please, and the reasons.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Major General Greg Porter, the Adjutant General for the state of Wyoming. And if it pleases you, the chair and the committee, I would like Major Maury to kind of walk us through the bill and give her a little experience with the committee, if that's all right.
That's acceptable to the committee, General.
Right, thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Major Jackie Maury, Legislative Liaison for the Wyoming Military Department. And I'm going to walk us through House Bill 16. Because you all worked this bill during our interim session, my goal is to provide just a quick overview to ensure we're all on the same page about the impacts of this proposed legislation. In 2004, the Wyoming legislature created a reserve account called the Wyoming Military Assistance Trust Fund. The fund is outlined in Wyoming Statute 19-7-401. The fund is available to Wyoming residents serving in the armed forces and members of the Wyoming National Guard. State law and administrative rules have established an application process that individuals use to apply for financial assistance for issues specifically stemming from their service. Any financial assistance provided is done so with the earned interest from that account. The caveat for the fund has been that applicants have to have been in an active status. If passed, this bill will expand eligibility to members of the Wyoming National Guard who are in an inactive duty status, the status that most guardsmen are in for their drill weekends. The bill is before you because under General Porter's leadership, the #1 priority of the military department has been achieving end strength. In the National Guard, we achieve end strength 2 different ways. First, we work to get new people into the uniform through our accession process. And second, we try to retain as many qualified trained soldiers and airmen as we can. This bill helps us with that second effort. We know through an internal survey that about 30% of our force weighs childcare, dependent care issues when they consider from year to year whether to remain in uniform. We believe we have a way with this bill to assist with that obstacle. Through the rulemaking process, the military department will target this benefit at our traditional guardsmen, so not our full-timers, but our drill weekend soldiers and airmen at the lower ranks. So most likely E6 and below, perhaps our O1s and O2s. And we'll also look at those that have fewer years of service. So let's say 10 years or less. While this bill does not generate new dependent care options, it will help to alleviate the financial burden assumed by guardsmen on drill weekend. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd like to walk through the bill. All right. This
Please,
bill
Major.
is
Continue.
pretty simple, sir. Committee, it's divided into two sections. Section 1 has some administrative pieces. So for example, if you flip to page 2 on lines 2, 5, 11, 15, and 20, you'll find revisions and additions to current state statute 19-7-401. The purpose is to clean up and clarify the bill. A good example is on line 5, we add the word military in front of reserve unit to just better clarify who the target audience of this fund is. And then the real meat of the bill starts on line 22, page 2, and ends on page 3, line 4. And you can see in there the phrase dependent care. And so that's what we're trying to do, is allow us to use this already established fund to pay for some dependent care expenses. Subsection B starts on page 3, line 6. If you jump down to line 10, we've added the phrase or other required military duty. That's the part that lets us get after inactive duty. So again, inactive duty is the status that our guardsmen are in for drill weekends. Section 2 just outlines that this would be effective July 1st. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Okay. Major, is this the first time you've presented before a committee?
Yes, sir.
Nice job. Thank you. Okay, questions for the major? Representative Stiver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have you talked to other guard units in other states about this? I had a conversation with the G1 Sergeant Major, Utah National Guard here just the other day. This program failed down there. So what's going to be different with this program? You got to
Major?
remember.
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiver, I can't speak specifically to Utah, but General Porter and others in the organization have been in touch with other guard units talking about really creative ways to recruit and retain airmen and soldiers. We know this is a nationwide problem. Propensity to serve is a particular concern. Fewer and fewer young people willing to join the military. We know this will be somewhat a first of its kind program. I'm not sure how they fund it or administer it. We would use that rulemaking process and an established process we have already in the military department, where soldiers, airmen, members of the military who are Wyoming citizens can apply for financial assistance.
Follow up, Representative?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I had a pretty good lengthy conversation. They've done away with this program. So.
Mr. Chairman.
General.
Hey, Representative Stiver, I'd be interested in what failure means and how about taking care of the dependents for our soldiers and airmen could fail as we do that. I think certainly this allows us the ability to get after it. I tell you, the Department of Defense is starting to recognize this as an impediment to service. They're doing quite a bit of work on the reserve side, particularly, but the National Guard is also starting to pick up on this as well. So I'd be interested in the details of it, but I don't know the danger of failure on this, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Stiver?
Yeah, yes, sir, General Porter. If you look at the Utah Guard, even in the metropolitan areas, they could not find the daycare workers, and there was nobody actually using it. And it's, you're going to have, even in the smaller units, they tried to put it in, and it just failed. It just didn't work. They couldn't get the people to do it. And
Mr. Chairman, Representative
Major?
Stiver, this bill does not go that far. It does not create new dependent care or child care options for our soldiers and airmen. While that might be the ideal solution, is to figure out how to generate more options within communities, we're not getting after that. It would require soldiers and airmen who are asking to use this benefit to go find childcare themselves or dependent care themselves. And this would be a reimbursement. They provide some sort of receipt. We cap the reimbursement amount, coordinating with DFS to determine the market rates in the state of Wyoming.
General.
Sort of to continue along on those lines, one of the major problems with civilian or medical care or with child care right now is the lengthy amount of certifications that a particular child care facility has to go through in order to meet DoD standards. Our intent is not to get into that level of certification. That's the problem. We just don't see that across the state, as many child care facilities being able to do that. This is going to be very much on the soldier and airman. If it's a relative family member that does this, if it's somebody that doesn't quite meet the certification standards, this really opens it up pretty wide for us to provide childcare. So in that respect, I think that's where we're different than Utah, because that is the impediment. You just can't get people that can meet all the standards to get that done.
I think Representative Baker was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is revolving around the definition, and I just want a little bit of clarity as far as the dependent care. Does that just entail child and children, or what else would be encompassed in that definition?
Major?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Baker, that's a great question. We purposefully use the term dependent versus child to try to incorporate, let's say we have an airman or soldier that has an adult child with disabilities, for instance. And so maybe child doesn't capture them. So as an example, that's what we would potentially be getting after.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So building on the general's last words, for some context, sir, what would be the potential number of our airmen and soldiers that could benefit from this important source?
Mr. Chairman,
General?
Representative Henderson, as Major Morey said, we took about 30% of the force, used it as a reason why they would stay or go. We've continued to kind of work it around to see how, approximately 100 or so folks to get that done. I think we're going to have to try this out for a little bit and work through, how much can we afford and still not drain our primary account to get that done. So I don't have great numbers for you, sir, but our intent is to report back to this committee the effectiveness of this legislation and how we're really retaining soldiers and airmen.
Other questions, committee? So a couple major, how much money is in the count that earns interest, please?
Mr. Chairman, the original investment by the legislature was $5 million. We're sitting just over $2 million in earned interest income.
Okay, so Major, with the interest income, that is all you can spend, correct? You cannot
Yes, sir.
spend the corpus. Am I
Yes, sir,
correct?
that's correct.
Okay, and the fiscal note indicates, and I know you've worked with our fiscal staff, about 136,000 a year, give or take a little bit, versus the 2 million that's there. So do you think that's enough, an adequate buffer?
Mr. Chairman,
General?
I think that's where our heads are at right now. What we wanted to kind of make sure is we've got 5 million in corpus. There's another 1 million that we want to not touch either, in case we have another major deployment to be able to use that. So that leaves us about 1.2 million that we want to try over the next 4 to 5 years to see if we can affect retaining soldiers and airmen to do that. So that 136,000, as it plays out over that's sort of our goal.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Representative O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering when the corpus was established.
Major?
Mr. Chairman, Representative O'Hearn, 2004, sir.
Thank you.
Other questions? The questions? Okay, with that, I'll then open for public testimony if you'll stay with us. So I'm looking, I don't see any other legislators in that. Do we have anyone from the governor's office? By the way, for all of you there, we've been told to ask these questions in order. We're supposed to be nice. So it doesn't mean to put down anybody from the public who's here. So any agencies, any other agencies wish to speak? Amanda, anyone? Okay, so general public, sorry, you kind of come last, but sorry, you raised your hand. Please come up here, identify yourself. So continue.
I am Airman First Class Zach Harold. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I appreciate your time in this matter. I am a part of the public affairs office here in the 153rd Airlift Wing, obviously in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And October 15th, 2019 is when I rose my right hand and I swore in to become a part of the United States military. Unlike most members, I was 28 years old when I swore in, meaning I already had a family, I already had kids. Now, almost 3 years later, I'm here to just discuss an issue that plagues every parent that is a member of the U.S. military, and that's childcare. Married or single, childcare can still pose the same problems, especially if both parents are in the military. When I first joined, I was married with 2 kids, and naturally on the drill weekends, my boys would just stay with my wife. But if she was busy or had other plans, we had to pay for childcare. Now that we are no longer together, childcare is an issue every drill weekend that aligns with my boys' visitation. In any scenario, I always look at all the options because there's not just one. You know, of course, I would love for my kids to go see family, but my closest family lives 2.5 hours away. So that's not an option. I would love for them to just go hang out with friends. That would be great too. When that happens, I typically pay my friends. However, with drill coinciding with weekends, they usually have plans and they're out of town or something along those lines. So that leads to the third option, and that is paying for childcare through a provider. Now here in Cheyenne, there are several childcare options that are available on the weekends. And I think that's partially due to having such a large community that does drill on the weekends. However, that comes with a price. So for example, with my 2 boys, I have a 9-year-old and a 3-year-old. And for 1 day of drop-in, providing the drop-in is available, because if it's not, I have to pay for the entire month just so they have a spot to be dropped in on guard weekends. So if I do drop in, my older son is 9, that'll be $35 a day. And then my younger son is 3, it'll be $45 a day. So over the course of a drill weekend, I'm spending $160 on childcare that if I wasn't in the guard, I wouldn't be spending. That's over half of what I make on the weekend. And now I'm not here to ask you to put more money in my pocket. I'm not here to ask you to give me the time off, because that's what I signed up for. I signed up to be here and help. But what I am asking is that you put yourself in the shoes of a struggling parent like myself, and just you have the opportunity to remove the stress that childcare is putting on us as military service members. And with this bill, that could be removed. So thank you.
Zach, I'm sorry, I did not catch your last name.
Harold.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So any questions for Mr. Harold? Committee? Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else in the audience wish to speak? Bill, come on up. Please identify yourself for the record.
Screen, honest.
Yeah, it's not coming through very much.
Well, there I'm closer. Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I wanted to mention the Adjutant General's office, the Wyoming Guard, also typically has something like, I think, about 6 to 12 members on active duty detached. They're not part of a unit that went somewhere. They're just a single person that was sent somewhere. And those usually involve some expenses too that might or might not be covered by this. And I'd like to ask you to keep that in mind. The other part of it, you've heard a lot about families. And, when the military started bringing in families where both spouses were military members, that brings some stuff with it too. And you've heard plenty of it, so I won't repeat it. But I would ask you to make sure that as you think about this, or maybe it's a legislative intent, that this money can be used broadly for the benefit of the members that are doing things and just shelling stuff out of their pocket to assist where they are. Subject to your questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Winnie? Representative Stiver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Winnie, you being prior service Navy, every service has it called a family care plan. And that's part of the soldier's responsibility if they want to serve is to figure that stuff out. AR 600-20 in the Army. Command policy says that they should have a family care plan. Is that correct?
I got it,
Mr.
Representative.
Winnie.
Mr. Chairman, I got it. But there's always some expenses that go with that that you don't necessarily plan for very well. I understand. I mean, in the shipboard environment, you just heard the guy, the gentleman talk about being a single parent with children. In the Navy, they have to have things put in place ahead of time, and it's a command responsibility to verify it. But you're talking here of a fund that is designed to ameliorate expenses that are beyond those kind of things that just come out of the pocket. I'm sure you had them too while you were on active duty.
Yes, I was a single parent with 2 kids in Germany. And I deployed because I had a family care plan.
Is there a question in there?
No, I'm just making a statement.
Okay.
Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for Mr. Winnie? Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Anyone else here wish to speak on this bill? Okay. Amanda, anyone in the virtual realm?
Mr. Chairman, no one has their hand raised at the moment.
Okay. Right. I'll give them a minute just in case. Okay. With that, I will close public testimony. Committee? Okay, moved by Henderson, seconded by O'Hearn. Any comments or anything before we work the bill? Okay, any changes? Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Changes? A question having been called? Diana, would you take roll, please?
Yes. Representative Baker.
Aye.
Representative Burt. Representative Henderson.
Aye.
Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Representative Obermueller.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Stivar.
No.
Chairman Burkhart.
Aye. And I don't believe that Representative Brown was able to leave a proxy.
No.
He is really out sick.
Okay, so I'll mark him excused. So we have 6 ayes and 2 noes.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a volunteer? Okay. Representative McGuire, thank you. Okay. The issue with Representative Brown is that I sat next to him on the floor, and it's been implied to me how sick he is. So I've been wondering if I'm kind of toast before the end of the week. So just bear with me. So next bill for our consideration is Veterans Facility surrounded by grazing, House Bill 17. So I was going to say, General, just sit there and Mr. Smith, yeah, you're all ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris Smith, the Senior Counsel for the Wyoming Military Department. House Bill 17 is a 4-page bill, familiar with this committee since we worked it several times during the interim. The original impetus for the bill was the Oregon Trail Veterans Cemetery that most of you visited during the interim. With the improved road that was put in on the cemetery side of the river for Evansville to have a second outlet that didn't include railroad tracks. There was the concern raised about further development on that side of the river. The original idea was either purchasing the property or creating some limitations on that state-owned land that's operated by or managed by the Office of State Lands and Investment. Through the interim process and some of the testimony, this bill before the committee was the one adopted. And it included all veterans facilities, specifically to include the Veterans Home and Skilled Nursing Center in Buffalo, which also has state land managed by OSLI. There was some testimony about a potential gravel lease or a gravel lease near the Veterans Home that caught the committee's attention. So what this bill does is amends 36.5.106 at the bottom of page 1 and going on to page 2 to essentially state that the State Board of Land Commissioners down on line 15 on page 2 carrying on to page 3 with a long legal description, which is the buffer zone for the cemetery. Let me make sure I got the two. Yes, the buffer zone for the cemetery, restricting any use of it down there on lines 10 and following on page 3, that any lease would include a clause restricting the use of the leased property to grazing purposes only. The idea being to protect the tranquility of the cemetery. And then in subsection C down on line 17 on page 3, the same language with a different legal description involves the land that surrounds the Veterans Home and the skilled nursing facility in Buffalo. Again, with any lease of that state property to be restricted to grazing purposes only. The effective date down section 2 on page 4 is of course July 1st of 2022. The whole purpose of the bill essentially is to minimize the uses of the state land surrounding those veteran facilities for their peacefulness and the tranquility of both properties, which is, of course, this committee in the Wyoming legislature have been very good to veterans in this state and in basically creating these facilities, and we don't want them to be degraded because of the uses of the surrounding land. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that's the bill, and I stand for your questions.
And Mr. Smith, thank you for not going through all these legal descriptions. I think we have an idea of where the land is. And then, any questions for Mr. Smith? Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Let's see. So with that, then I'll open it for public comment. Senate President Dockstetter. Okay, thank you. I see no other legislators here. Any agencies who speak? Mr. Crowder, please come up. Mr. Crowder, proceed.
My name is Jason Crowder, Deputy Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this bill again, and appreciate all the work that's gone in the interim to get to this point. I don't want to belabor the point. I think as the military department discussed, we've talked about this in depth. But we do identify these two different parcels of land as two different parcels of land. One is a state trust parcel dedicated to the Common School Fund. That is a fund that was identified in the Organic Act of the state of Wyoming when it was a territory of Wyoming before it became a state. Within the Enabling Act, as it was enrolled into the Union and in the Constitution of the state of Wyoming. So it has a long history prior to the state being it, and that those lands were dedicated to the Common School Fund and for the direct benefit of the Common School Fund through rentals and through sale. It's not anticipated in that enabling act, constitution, or organic act that those lands were for the benefit of any other entity. And I think we would define another entity as the military department or something other than the Common School Fund. So I just want to make that point again, Mr. Chairman, and because we believe these parcels are two separate parcels in nature and how they are to be managed and how the Board of Land Commissioners and essentially the Office of State Lands and Investments manages these properties. I'm happy to talk about them one at a time and answer any questions specific to the vet cemetery and the Common School Fund first.
Questions for Mr. Crowder? Questions? So, okay. So, Mr. Crowder, yes, let's stick with the land around the Veteran Cemetery first. Question I have is, what's the current use of that land, please?
Mr. Chairman, that's a great question. And we provided the committee with a map in the interim that really does a good job of explaining all the uses on that property. The most prevalent use is obviously grazing. We have an agricultural and grazing lease on the property, but we also have numerous amounts of easements for roadways, for power lines, for oil pipelines, gas pipelines, and but mostly it's for grazing at the moment.
Okay. So, Mr. Crowder, then the same question for the land at the Veterans Home and the skilled nursing facility.
Mr. Chairman, currently that land is utilized for grazing purposes with the sand and gravel lease as well.
So, Mr. Crowder, I was just checking, see if the committee had any questions. So would the sand and gravel lease interfere with the, let's say, the tranquility of these facilities? You think? That's an opinion question.
Mr. Chairman, it is, and I don't know that I can answer that opinion question for you. I will note that when we offer a parcel for lease and when the Board of Land Commissioners ultimately issues that lease, it's just a lease. It's just an opportunity to develop that. Any lessee on that property still has to go through all the regulatory hoops to develop that property. And specific to sand and gravel, they do have to go through the DEQ's limited mining permit process, which includes public comment and all the analysis that DEQ provides.
Representative O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know this came up in the interim, Mr. Crowder, about how much it would cost or how long that lease is for the sand and gravel. And how much, what's the difference between a sand and gravel lease compared to a grazing lease?
Mr. Crowder?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to answer that question again. Yes, sand and gravel leases are very temporary in nature. They're issued for 2 years at a time and they can be renewed at the end of that 2 years. This specific sand and gravel lease was initially issued in 2019. It just went through a renewal in June of 2021 and would be up for renewal again in 2023. Agriculture and grazing leases are a little bit different. By statute, they can be for a term of 10 years. So the agriculture and grazing lease out there is under that same term of 10 years. And in the report that I provided to the committee in the interim, it has the anniversary date for that lease. I don't have that off the top of my head for you, but those would be the differences.
Representative Henderson, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think it's fair to ask the question, given what you know in the foreseeable future, do you see any real impact of this policy in those two areas in terms of this buffer zone and the duty to provide, the revenue off of, for the state trust, for example?
Mr. Crowder?
Mr. Chairman, I do, and we are blending the two parcels a little bit. And so going back to the vet cemetery specifically and the trust land piece, as I indicated, that has a very specific purpose. It's for the benefit of the Common School Fund. It's the revenue derived off of leasing and sale of that property. The bill as written seems to limit that to where the property could never be sold for that benefit, which seems to be contradictory to what the constitutional mandate is, and to limit its use to only grazing. So I believe we couldn't put any other use on top of there, possibly no other easements that would derive revenue or anything else. As the committee is aware, it's adjacent to the town of Evansville. It's annexed into the city of Evansville. And when we looked at that process several years ago in the annexation process, it was with the intent to develop it for residential or industrial purposes that would otherwise generate revenue back to the beneficiaries. The bill as written would limit that, and we believe we wouldn't be able to comply with the statutory mandate if we were restricted like that.
Follow up, go ahead.
Thank you,
Representative.
Mr. Chairman. So given that response, are there any other state lands or state trust lands that perhaps would be confronted with the same maybe issue that you're referring to on this?
Mr. Crowder?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, I may not fully understand your question as far as limitations placed on state lands.
Well,
Representative, go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, what I'm looking at is we have different areas of the state where we have the nexus of state lands, state trust lands and development. Are you confronted with the concern you're expressing here in those areas?
Mr. Crowder?
Mr. Chairman, I can't draw an example directly right now where we are limited in our constitutional mandate to generate benefit from those lands to the beneficiaries. We do place limitations on development for the protection of habitat or human health and safety. But as far as an overarching limitation to the constitutional mandate of revenue generation or benefit back to those beneficiaries, I'm not pulling one for an example for you right now.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Crowder. So,
Mr. Chairman.
yes,
Because we do think of these two parcels as separate, I want to concentrate on the vet's home for just one quick second.
please.
Just to note that the committee asked for a report and the office did provide one about the title and how that parcel of land became owned by the state and who manages it and just the history that came along with that. And I don't need to rehash that whole report, but I will give you the high level executive summary that we provided. That back in 1990, through the reorganization of government, the vet's home and the lands associated with it were transferred to the Department of Health. And then in 2013, the legislature defined those lands as acquired institutional and clarified that the Board of Land Commissioners has the management authority over all acquired institutional lands that are not directly utilized for departmental purposes. And that's how the Office of State Lands and Investments comes to manage grazing and the sand and gravel lease around that property. Obviously, we're subject to statutory direction, and specifically in this instance, it's statute 9-2-2005. And that basically gives the board the authority to lease and manage those acquired institutional lands for the benefit of the Department of Health. And just to be clear, again, that's just the lands outside of the campus, not anything internal. In 2013, Senate Enrolled Act 85 initiated that management authority for the Board of Land Commissioners on those lands. And inside of that direction, it also required that the office work with the institutions to develop a report for the best use of that property. And of course, we did work with the Department of Health at that time and defined the best use, again, with the Department of Health, as being a commercial residential development through special use leasing and the addition of mineral development possibilities. So what we have today on the ground is a furtherance of those conversations with the Department of Health and not, I guess, a siloed within the Office of State Lands and Investments. What I'd also like to note is that in that report that we provided, it told you that there was 1,272.82 acres identified to be set aside for the soldiers and sailors home outside of the city of Buffalo, and that the vet's home be constructed or built through the military facilities that are there. Since that time, and really beginning in 1927 through 1996, the board has sold 927.331 acres of the original rough 1,200 acres to a variety of different users, the city of Buffalo being one, and then private individuals for residential development as well. If you remember, Mr. Chairman, part of that report did have a map. There are some lands that are still owned by the Department of Health and are not adjacent to the vet's home and are not even close to the agricultural lands that are there. Just to highlight that the bill indicates that those lands would never be sold. And I just want to give you a history that those lands have been sold in the past for specific purposes. And in the future, this bill may limit that ability. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have, and I'm happy to answer any more questions you have.
Okay. Any more questions for Mr. Crowder? Okay. So, Mr. Crowder, do we need to amend this bill in any way at this point in time, do you think?
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to help you with amendments. I think you can get a sense from my testimony that we feel very strongly about the trust portion, the constitutional portion, and feel like this hinders that ability. I'm not an attorney to give you an exact legal hypothesis on that. However, the acquired institutional lands, that is something obviously within the legislature's purview to manage however it deems fit. I can help you with an amendment to open up the ability to sell property off of that parcel in the future if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Representative Obermuller.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Do you know how much was paid for the sand and gravel lease?
Mr. Crowder?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, those leases sell for $1 an acre and they renew at $1 an acre. It's relatively cheap.
Representative, continue.
Thank you. How many acres?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, great question. 320 acres in total.
Thank you. And the lease is that's for the 2-year?
Mr. Chairman,
lease.
that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Crowder. Any other agency wish to speak on the bill? Okay, any members of the public here in the room? Mr. Novotny, good to see you again.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Bill Novotny, Johnson County Commissioner, proud to host the Wyoming Veterans Home and the soon-to-open skilled nursing facility. Mr. Chairman, I rise in absolute support of this bill. It is critical that we ensure the pastoral nature of the campus around the Veterans Homes of Wyoming. We were the entity that was first made aware of this situation when we were in the process of installing a donated water line between the city of Buffalo and Johnson County to this new facility. And so we think it's critical that you advance this bill. The veterans there do not deserve to have a mining facility outside their bedroom windows. We have residents that are of the age of 100, who is our oldest resident. We're quite proud of him, and he's kind of on his 101st, down to somebody that is in his mid-20s. So we think it is critical that you allow us to continue our mission there of providing exceptional care to the residents of the Wyoming Veterans Home without a gravel operation or any other mining operation on those facilities. And with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Okay, questions for Commissioner Novotny? Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the room? Please.
Good afternoon.
Please continue.
Mr.
Identify
Chairman,
yourself
members
for
of
the
committee.
record.
I'm Ken DeCaria, Wyoming School Boards Association, and I want to focus my content strictly on school trust lands, because, when we talk about state lands, it often gets sort of mixed up together, that we think that they're all the same and that they belong to the state of Wyoming. School trust lands were given under the Act of Admission to the state of Wyoming, and Wyoming happened to be in the time when they got 2 per every township. They got 16 and 36. They were given with one purpose and one purpose only. There is no second purpose to that. The one purpose is to fund K-12 education. And so what I want to speak to you about, and I think that, and I've done this in many committees, Mr. Chairman, because people see those lands out there and they think, okay, I've got a good idea for a use for that. And so, our use will be the use that's there. And Mr. Chairman, I don't, I know how touchy and how sensitive this situation is. And I'm not unsympathetic to any of that. But I think the bigger picture is that school trust lands need to be thought of in a way that so that you can maximize that revenue to generate income for K-12 education. And at this time, especially, I think we all know that that's important. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure how much revenue can be generated off this piece. And so I'm trying to speak in maybe a 10,000-foot view of just school trust lands in general. And part of it is just the educational piece, because they often get mixed in together as a lump sum and just thinking that, well, state of Wyoming, they can do pretty much what they want. If you were a trustee of a private trust, I think you'd be in violation if you did anything but tried to figure out what was in the best interests of the trust beneficiaries, which are the school children of the state of Wyoming. And so I think when you look at any of these pieces of land, you have to look at through that as a trustee and through that lens when you figure out how you're going to go about managing these lands. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm not here to debate merits of the bill, good or bad, and of that part. And I only just wanted to speak on the school trust land issue.
Mr. Carey, we appreciate the comments, and I think that's a good thing to remember, the difference between the multiple lands. I mean, we got 5,000 acres for in the active admission for a fish hatchery. Most people don't know that. And that there are lands there for the miners hospital, the penitentiary, school trust, the fish hatchery, and I can't remember the fifth one. There were
State hospital, Mr. Chairman.
State hospital. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Carey? Questions? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Anyone else in the room? Anyone else in the room? Okay. Anyone have their hand raised, Amanda? Okay. I'll just make a statement at this point. I was asked to make this, the Wyoming Farm Bureau does like the bill and would support it. So Mr. Moline has had to leave, but asked me to make that statement. So, right, with that, I'll close public testimony. Committee? Moved by Stiver. Seconded by Henderson. Comments, discussion, Representative Burt.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question. Would it be more feasible to try to table this till our next committee meeting so we could try to work between the two concerns we have with how that land is set up and the way the bill is written, so we make sure that the parties that are affected can actually be not affected?
Okay, discussion? Comments? Representative, we did get a fairly good report at our last meeting on that. And the one interesting thing was the school trust lands. And I think that's why we proceeded with the bill. While they are available for other uses, most of those uses are not practical. There are numerous easements on that land. The land is somewhat broken up. Probably the best you could do is, if I remember the map correctly, is the portion of land between the new road and the river might be available for something else. Was the best use. I think Representative McGuire has that map of the way those lands. Representative McGuire, do you want to address that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With all due respect, I would resist a motion to table at this time. We've gone through it, and those lands have both been set aside for the benefit of our veterans. And with regard to additional use or potentially selling them, the bill addresses this. It says that they will be used for grazing only until such time as either of the facilities is no longer in existence. And with regard to our veterans home, I simply can't imagine any of that property being sold for profit and to have a lease put on there. I'd certainly be interested in finding out who with the Department of Health signed off on that lease at the time that it was let or at the time that it was renewed. That would be an interesting question to find out. And with regard to the properties around these veteran cemetery, as mentioned, that piece of property is crisscrossed by easements. It is being used for grazing right now. That's the highest and best use. Any other use is going to be industrial in nature and would be, it would simply destroy the sanctity of that site, and what a shame. So I hope that the committee would not table it at this point and that we would keep going. Thank you.
Representative Burt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I was more concerned on if we're going to have a constitutionality issue with the state, the way that it sounds like it could possibly the way it's written. I just want to make sure we don't have something down the road with our good intentions to try to preserve the lands we have. But if we have an issue the way that it's written, if someone could challenge with our state constitution, I just want to make sure we're protected there.
Representative, to my knowledge, this has gone through legal review through LSO, and those issues were not raised. So that's all I can tell you on that one. Other questions? Okay. I'll just ask any amendments on the bill, considering the legal descriptions that are included. I would ask if you have an amendment, you should really have the legal descriptions with it. Okay. So, any other amendments? Okay. Okay. Question being asked. Diana, would you please take roll
Okay.
on House Bill 17?
Representative Baker. Representative Burt.
No.
Representative Henderson. Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Representative Overmuller.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Stivar.
Aye.
Chairman Burkhart.
Aye. Okay. Volunteer? Again, you like this, don't you?
I like this.
Okay.
It's one of
All
my
right.
favorite bills.
Thank you, Representative. Okay. General, Mr. Smith, Major, Mr. Shepherd, thank you very much, and all those who were here for this bill. Okay, next bill for our consideration is, let's see, wait a minute, hold on a minute. Yeah. 13. Okay, hang on just a second, just a little bit of housekeeping. And Director, I noticed you sat in the front row for those last two bills. Is you just missing it?
I almost jumped up to testify there, Chairman.
I could see that.
And I thought, well, this
All right. So House Bill 13, off-road recreational vehicle operation. And Director, do you wish to
Mr.
present this?
Chairman, with your permission, I'll lead off and I'll pass it to Mr. Rossetti. For the record, Luke Reiner, Director of YDOT, and joined by Taylor Rossetti and Mark Gillette. And Mr. Chairman, really the topic today, House Bill 13, off-road recreational vehicles operation, and a little bit of history here that got us here today is right now, it's against the law to operate an off-road vehicle in the interstate right of way. And we were approached by an element from the southwest corner of the state asking for economic development reasons for us to consider about a 3.5 mile stretch of the interstate to connect two trails, which had been really designated as trails through other statutes with our Parks and Cultural Resources area. And as we looked at it, certainly there's some challenges there. But one of our purpose statement, as you look at YDOT, is to support our state's economy, to connect our communities and make lives better. And really, we thought that this initiative fit within that purpose. And so we went to work to get to a yes with a multitude of different people and different entities. And really what you see in front of you today is the result of that work. And so it's close coordination, with county commissioners, with legislative leaders from that area of the state, with state parks and cultural resources and others. And so we'd certainly thank everybody for their partnership as we look at, utilizing assets that we have in the state to better our state. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll pass the baton to Mr. Rossetti to walk you through the bill.
Mr. Rossetti, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, Taylor Rossetti, Support Services Administrator for YDOT. As the director mentioned, this was kind of a multifaceted approach that we were brought into in order to try to solve this problem. As we've continued those discussions, we do have an amendment that we can discuss at the end of the presentation if the chairman would allow it, but I will walk you through the bill as it's drafted today. As the director mentioned, right now, there's a prohibition for the operation of these within interstate rights of way. And if you look at the bottom on page 1, it basically allows for that operation in accordance with Wyoming statute 31.5.1601. So that's introducing the idea that under certain conditions, these vehicles could be operated in the interstate. As we then turn the page, we get into 31.5.1601, and we add some language here on lines 8 and 9, and it basically goes down to modify the existing section that creates that prohibition. So again, we're modifying that section to allow this under certain conditions. Moving on through then page 2, lines 11 through 14, it pulls in the definition of the off-road vehicle, which is that reference there on page 12. And then it also talks about the roadway right-of-way, except for the portion of an off-road vehicle under this section. So you move on then to lines 16 through 21, and it's telling you where those things could operate on a right-of-way. And again, this is not the paved surface. This is if the department has basically incorporated this into the trail system and created a separate facility outside the highway. And it also includes on line 17 there, a physical barrier between the highway and this trail. So I think that's important. We discussed that at length during the interim session. The other reference that I'll pull in here at your direction from earlier, Mr. Chairman, is 31.2.701 through 31.2.707, really describes kind of what the outdoor trail program is as operated by the state parks. So that's kind of what that reference there is at the bottom of page 2. Moving over to page 3, this talks about the fact that that off-road vehicle would have to be operated by an individual with the appropriate class of license. So this isn't minors driving around. This is licensed individuals operating these vehicles. And that the vehicle shall either operate with a license plate or with the decal that is specified for the off-road vehicle program. And then further on here, we have on lines 9 through 13, basically stipulating that they shall not cross the interstate for any reason except through an opening in a physical barrier between the trail and the interstate highway at a designated crossing in the marked or signed Wyoming off-road recreational vehicle trail. So that's where we're at with the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Mr. Rossetti? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am disappointed that my favorite colonel is not here. And I should have asked this question last time, and I do apologize about that. With regard to a penalty provision, does the first portion of this statute, 31.5.124, would it be subject to the penalty provisions at the end of Part 31? And or with regard to the operation in the right of way? So I guess I can back into that. Do we need to have a specific reference to a penalty provision? That's one. And if I may ask a follow-up question, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rossetti?
Mr. Chairman and Representative McGuire, I'd have to look at the detail of that to give you a definitive answer. And I think if we needed to make a reference or amendment there, I think we'd be able to work with you to get that in there if needed.
And then I do have one
Follow up, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with regard to that amendment, I would just request that you think about, so all of the other things that are covered in the initial part of Part 31, like driving over a fire hose and stopping for stop signs and things like that. In my opinion, subject to what you guys think, but in my opinion, whether you're in a car or an off-road vehicle, that would be the same. And if we need to specifically mention that or not, but I would just invite you to take a look at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Rossetti?
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, your line of thinking is very similar to part of what is in the proposed amendment that we have before us. So I understand where you're coming from, and I'll evaluate it from that angle.
Representative Stiver, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My most concern is the barrier. What type of barrier have you guys discussed putting up between Painter Road and the exit there and coming into that town?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, Mr. Director. Oh, it's one of those days. We're still kicking the
Yes, sir.
dust
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
So
Thank
please,
you,
Director,
Mr. Chairman.
continue.
And Representative Stiver, what we have discussed is that we would work that through rules and regs, and it would depend on the terrain. And so primarily the purpose of that barrier would be to keep the ORVs off of the interstate and separated. If there was probably smooth wire, something like that, to be determined. But if it was close to the road, then it might need to be a concrete barrier of some sort to provide protection from somebody leaving the road and hitting the vehicle. So we would propose we work that through rules and regulation.
I'm sorry. A follow-up? You're good. Okay. Representative Henderson, then Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's, I know that this is focused really on the southwest part of our state and along our interstate. My question goes to, will this cover us if it's determined that this may be a good thing to do along other areas of the interstate? What's your view on that?
Director?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, we think this would be applicable to the entire state. We don't see this being used across the entire state. I don't think we're interested in having 402 miles of ORV right-of-way trail along the interstate. The concept here is working with state parks and cultural resources that really it's them working with local entities to support local economies. And so I think that's really the limits that are placed on this. And so in this case, we'll work to support local initiatives, and that's our role in this. And we see this bill as facilitating that across the state.
Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So remind us again of who's paying for the barriers, the development of all this, the signs. The last sheet says there's no fiscal impact. So who's picking up the fiscal impact of all this?
Director?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Obermuller. So a fine question, and that would be that the responsibility for the cost of building and maintaining is state parks and cultural resources. And I believe what not to put words in their mouth is that they would work with local entities to ensure that really the local entity that wants to use that is actually in the end responsible for the cost.
Other questions? Okay. Representative Henderson?
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our state receives a lot of federal assistance for our highways, particularly our interstates. And so I'm asking, would this bump up against anything that you know of regarding that area?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, negative. So we did, before we went down that road, we certainly talked with our federal highway partners, and they cleared us hot on this one. So, but because you're right, we don't want to jeopardize any federal fund.
Other questions? So Director, let me ask you, so what's the distance between the paved portion of the highway and the right-of-way fence generally? Or maybe that's a question for Mr. Gillette. We'll put him on the spot.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to refer that to my chief engineer, Mr. Gillette.
Mr. Gillette.
Mr. Chairman, my name's Mark Gillette, Chief Engineer for WYDOT. And
is your microphone on? Okay, you're just
okay.
Okay, there we
better?
go.
Again, my name's Mark Gillette, Chief Engineer for WYDOT. And, I can't answer that specifically. It does vary depending on terrain. But in general, I'd have to get back to you with a number.
Okay, so a follow-up to that one then is this off-road trail that would run along the interstate right away. About how wide would it be?
Mr. Chairman, I would have to refer to parks and their design of a trail. I think they would be better to answer that question.
Okay. Which leads me to some concern that, the department has authority and control over the highways and the interstate system. And I don't mean this in a personal way, Mr. Gillette, but now you're relinquishing design within the right of way to another agency. How do you feel about that? That tends to trouble me.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, certainly we would have to approve that. And as well as FHWA, because the interstates are a no access highway. And anytime you breach that, we're required to have their approval.
Okay. Right. Mr. Rossetti, you have something you'd like to add?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Currently, the process for enrolling public roads into the trail program requires that the owner of that road actually enter into an agreement with state parks. So state parks could come to us, or the locals could come to us and propose. We put a section of the interstate or one of our highways into this, but we still maintain control of that and would have to work with them to ensure it meets our safety parameters. So we still maintain design control and ensure the location of that meets all of the requirements that we need to meet.
Ari, I'm getting to really dislike this microphone. Page 3, Romanet 2. Shall not cross the interstate roadway for any reason except through an opening in the physical barrier. So are we envisioning these vehicles crossing the interstate highway, and in effect, once they're out of that barrier, they're uncontrolled? That, to me, this paragraph seems to indicate that, if you put an opening in that barrier, they can start running back and forth across the interstate.
Mr. Chairman, we would not allow an opening in the barrier without a very definitive and designated trail leading in a separated type fashion from the interstate itself. So in other words, they would not be able to cross the interstate unless there's an underpass or an overpass type structure, and that being the designated trail.
Yep. Mr.
Director.
Chairman, just to add to that, what Mr. Gillette says is exactly correct. If you use the bit of 3.5 miles that we used as really the test case here, at the east end of those 3.5 miles is an undercrossing, which connects to another county road on the south side of the interstate, where the trail continues, where the county's enrolled that road as part of the trail. So in this case, the crossing is the trail would be fenced along the north side of the interstate, and it would be right up against the fence. And as you reach the underpass, our barrier fence would end, and they would be able to cross underneath the underpass. And that's how they would cross the interstate to get to the south side. As we worked this, and it was worked extensively by our local engineers in the field there, we looked at multiple ways to cross that road. And this was deemed to be the most safe and the most effective way as we looked at the different options that were there.
Okay, thank you, Director. So, Director, have you received any more, since we've started talking about this issue, any more requests for this sort of activity along the interstate right away?
Mr. Chairman, we have not.
Okay, and so Director, there is a bill out there, I don't know if you've seen it, to start another roadway along Interstate 80 going from Rollins to Walcott. And I don't know if you've seen that bill or not.
Mr. Chairman, I have not seen that particular
Okay.
bill. Does that have to do with perhaps a bike path?
I believe so. There was a
I've heard
very
rumors.
substantial amount of money put in that bill. And I'm starting to get very concerned. We've opened the door with this to now everybody wants to do something along the interstate. So I just wanted to know if you had seen that yet. So, okay, thank you. Anything else, committee? Representative Henderson and then Obermiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, Director, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about, you mentioned that this would apply, across the state as appropriate. What about areas of potential conflict interacting with the wildlife, for example, at game crossovers, points, those, you're going to have limitations, or do we need a thing in here for like you to provide a rule to put some sideboards on this?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, that's a good question. And to me, that the sideboards are in the controls that we already have in place. So right now, State Parks is required to come to us to ask us to enroll. We evaluate lots, we get lots of requests for roads. And that's really what Mr. Gillette and his crew do, is they evaluate all those proposals. They either say yes or they say no. Quite honestly, they probably say no more than they say yes. And so I'm very comfortable with the fact that they will not allow something unsafe to occur. And so instead of trying, I think, put into statute all of those rules and regs, my recommendation is we work the rules and regs, and to the most extent possible, we use our current processes to ensure the safety of the roadway and the traveling public.
Done, Representative, follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real simply, I just wanted to make sure that there's no missed or disconnect between the two agencies in this important area related to safety. Wouldn't you agree?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, yes.
Okay, Representative Obermiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, just a reminder, is this the best option down in this area that this really relates to, the best option to get to some trail system, or is this the only option? Or is there a bigger picture to see here than building or authorizing this?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oldmill, that's an interesting question. This is the best option for us. If there are other options, one would be to require us to purchase right away on the other side of the fence to allow this and expand, the right of way. Another option would be, certainly, and the entities involved in this really ask landowners for permission to do the same issue. In the end, that was not granted. And so that's the request to us.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow on with Chairman Burkhart's concerns, I see allocation of time with your engineers on these kind of projects. Is it your sense that you would see an acceleration of your people's time in evaluating these kinds of projects around the state?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermiller, everything we do takes time. And how much time, it depends on how many requests come in. I'm not sure I see a landslide of these coming in, is my sense. But certainly we've invested time in it already.
Thank you. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just one other question. So let's say that there's a federal mandate that comes down that prohibits this type of activity. Do you have some subject to language, whether it be in your rule and reg, or should we put it in the statute so that if things change and we may lose our highway funding, do you have the opportunity to react to those things that may come up in the future? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, that's actually an interesting question. And I think if you were right now, the way this would be written, my sense would be it would pit state law against federal. I think federal law typically supersedes state. And so we could maybe shut it down under that premise. I don't think we'd be opposed to having something in the law that says, subject to federal regulations. But that would probably be a legal question for our legal team unless somebody has another opinion here.
Okay. So Director, you just said something a little while ago that kind of tripped something in my mind. You indicated that you'd have to purchase right of way as an alternative to putting it in the current right of way on the interstate. Wouldn't that fall to someone else, say to state parks who wanted this to purchase that right of way?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I was looking at options. One option is to use existing right of way. Another option is to use extra right of way, which is purchased by somebody. And another option is to use personal property on their side through some sort of lease agreement.
Okay.
I think as you evaluate options that are out there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, no other questions? I'll open it to public comment. Oh, I'm sorry, Director.
I think very germane to the discussion, however, is our discussion of Amendment 1.
Okay,
And with your
I
permission,
apologize
think
for
while we're here,
forgetting that.
I'd
Please,
recommend you talk.
do you have copies? We work well with printed materials. Oh. Okay, thank you, Diana. If it wasn't for staff, I would be lost, I think, so. Okay, Mr. Rossetti, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative McGuire. Part of the nexus of why this amendment came up was some of the similar concerns that you raised versus enforcement. And what we came to realize was these vehicles would be operating potentially on public streets under two sets of rules. One when they're licensed and registered with a license plate, and another when they just have an off-road sticker. One of the concerns that was raised as we looked through that, and we talked to a few different law enforcement entities, and even with our partners over at state parks, was the idea of whether or not those vehicles, when they're not registered with a license plate, would need to have liability insurance like a vehicle. So if you'll indulge me on the proposed amendment there, I propose bringing in some additional language that's in existence already in 31.5.1601. And I think we have to insert that there on line 3. So there's an awful lot of language there, but again, all of that language that's in black is already existing statute. So that kind of helps you to walk through that. The first real change here is down here on line 22. And what I propose is that we strike the condition only, because what that says currently is that the only thing those people are required to have is the sticker offered by state parks for off-road trails. So I propose striking only. And then on line 23, after 31.2.703, adding the language proof of financial responsibility outlined in Wyoming statutes 31.9.402 through 31.9.415. And these are the liability requirements that all motor vehicle operators are required to have. So that's your 25/50/20 insurance requirements. Additionally, then, as you go down here, there was some discussion about the actual equipment that the vehicles would have when they're operating on those public roadways. And one of the things that we mentioned when you register is you have to have mirrors and a horn in addition to some equipment that exists in 1601. But the mirror and the horn were not a requirement when they just had an off-road vehicle. So again, I propose adding, and the order of this may be a question for LSO, but I propose doing it in V, which means we'd have to renumber below it. But Mr. Chairman, we propose the language of adding the horn pursuant to the appropriate section, which is 31.5.952A, and the mirror pursuant to 31.5.954. The reason for the rest of that sentence, which is as if registered under 31.2.232, was as we went into legal review, part of the advice we have from our attorney was that to try to make it very clear that for those vehicles operating on the public rights of way, even with just a sticker, we would like to have the same requirements as if they had a plate. So we tried to make it very clear, and that's the reason for that language there. Underneath the same logic, Mr. Chairman, if you continue on through that amendment on page 3, under line 8, we would add that same equipment. So C is again the financial responsibility requirement, and D is again the horn and mirror requirement. And the reason you've got to do it in both places is the top portion of 1601 deals with highways, basically highways and roads other than interstates. And then down below, that second portion is specific to interstates. So we felt it was important to have that amendment in both places. And with that, I'd stand for any questions, sir.
Any questions? Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like the content of the proposed amendment, but I'm just trying to get clarification on that second piece regarding insert. It says at line 8 on page 2. Given the line that's there now, where would you insert it? Please.
Mr. Rossetti.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, I believe the bottom part should read on page 3, line 8 to insert C and D.
Oh, page 3. My mistake. Sorry.
No.
I see. Thank you.
Any other questions on the proposed amendment? Okay, which we'll handle as we work the bill. Okay, thank you. So might as well just hang out in the room. Senator Schuler, do you wish to speak on the bill? I thought you'd spend plenty of time and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate the time. I wasn't sure I'd be able to sneak away from revenue, but we got through our bills and had a little time here. So yeah, this is a bill that I'm very passionate about. And I have to admit, I'm not a big OHV person, but we own one. And unlike a lot of the tourists, we take our OHV in a number of places because we have some folks that have ranches and this, that, whatever. But we had a visionary in our community who happens to be here today, who got us together, a handful of us, and said, hey, look at all of these OHVs that are just, once the weather gets hot in that, a state west of us, they all start coming to Southwest Wyoming. The problem is they just go right through. They get on the interstate and they head to the mountains. They don't stop. They don't spend money. They don't, sometimes they may get gas, but, they're not going to eat in our restaurants and this sort of thing because they would go to the mountains and that's where they would spend their time with their OHVs. So this visionary who happens to be in the room here, Mr. Tesoro, which I know a lot of you have heard from him, and I don't think he really even owns an OHV, which is kind of interesting, but got to get a group of us together and said, gosh, we need to capture some of this money. We need to get some more economic things going on in our community as well as in the state, because of the situation with our extractive industries and that sort of thing. He said, let's get these folks to stop here, eat in our restaurants, buy gas, go to our RV parks and figure a way to get to our trails without just going right to the mountains. So that's where this bill came from. We worked very hard, and some of the folks here will probably tell you a lot more information than I will. Worked real hard, though, trying to get the landowner who owns both sides of that little 3-mile section from Evanston to the first trail, and tried to get him to allow OHVs with the trail through his property. And his son thought he would be okay with it. And then eventually he changed. He's kind of an old time guy that said, nah, I just don't want any OHVs, out in the boonies. So we did try some other different ideas, and this just seemed like the best way to connect our community to, we have so many historical things that are close by that a lot of people never get off the interstate to see. In fact, I don't know how many of you guys have had a chance to get off and see the kilns, which are just an amazing thing. And there's so many things between, in Southwest Wyoming, headed to Kemmer, Green River, and so on. So we just thought this would be a great bill to try to, get some of that traffic to come off the interstate, spend money in our communities, not just head to the mountains with their OHVs. And not only that, take a look at what our historical artifacts are that are around and historical features that we have. So that's pretty much it. Like I said, I'm not one of those people that lives and dies in an OHV, but I don't mind getting in it once in a while and eating a little dust. But I don't want to take too much time because I know Mr. Cesaro and others have more important things to say about it than I do probably. But I did choose to be a part of the board for this group because they're very passionate. And I think they're headed down a path that we all should maybe take a look at in Wyoming. How can we capture more of the tourist trade? I mean, we know that it's the number 2, as far as bringing money into our state right now. So why not bring more? And not that, I think that at least the folks on the west, I'm sure you guys down here in Cheyenne see a lot of that same traffic coming up from the state south of us. But we just feel like it would really help our community and our county and our area with more folks coming and spending money in our community. So with that, I would stand for questions and thank you for your time.
Questions for Senator Schuler? Question? Senator, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator, I noticed earlier that Senate President Dockstader was standing around, and I think he wanted to speak on this. Is that his impression too? I know he had to go back to other duties, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I think he'd love to say a few words if he could. He actually has also been invested early on because I think he can see the potential for it up in his neck of the woods as well. So I can probably go capture him if you'd like, or if you think it would be, if you have time.
If he wishes, I'll
Okay.
give him the, that preference if he wishes to speak. If you want to find him, if not,
Sure.
we understand. I take it that he is in favor of the bill.
Yes, he is.
And you can tell him that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
So next would be anybody from the governor's office. Mr. Illaway, you'll just have to wait till I work my way through all of this. Okay. Any other state agencies? Okay. With that, then we'll go to the public. Mr. Illaway, you've been anxiously getting up and down. You have your exercise for the day.
Mr. Chairman, committee, I'm Pete Illaway, and I'm representing the Weed and Pest Council and the 23 Weed and Pest districts. And just to let the committee know, and some of you may know, we do have a contract with WYDOT to spray weeds on the highways throughout the state. And one of the highways are interstates. And we have had some problems running off-road vehicles on the interstates, and we do have spray equipment on those. And therefore, we thought that it would be helpful and probably help the highway patrolmen so they're not having problems with off-road vehicles running on the interstate. So suggest that on page 1 on line 15 that we try to insert unless operated in the furtherance of, and then use the Wyoming weed and pest statutes 11.5-105 A little I and 11-5-105 B the I, and I can work with your secretary, but it would help. We do have it so that the off-road vehicles can run on the highways, but not on the interstate. So that's what we'd like. I'll stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete, very much. So, Mr. Winnie? So the people know if you want, you better be quick and stand up. And I will, control the testimony, but we've got about 12 minutes left till we go back in. So Mr. Winnie, please.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. About 3 years ago, I bought a Polaris Ranger crew and use it extensively out there, Bondurant, Pinedale, that area. And both on wheels and with tracks in the wintertime. And I bought it. It was roadable, new. I specified that with the dealer. But I'd note that the structure of these things are such that they have no business being around an interstate. If you had an 80-mile-an-hour collision with a one of these, it would be all over. I ended up adding turn signals, electric turn signals to my Ranger after I had a near miss. I was on 191, getting ready to make a left turn. It was at night. I did the hand signals, which is what you're supposed to be doing, but it was on a downslope and there was an 18-wheeler coming up behind me that I hadn't seen. And about a second or two, if I'd started turning a second or two earlier, he'd have run right over me. So I added the turn signals so that would taken care of, because you couldn't see hand signals at night. So if you think about those implications of an accident with one of these, I got a crew cab specifically for grandkids. They have no business on an interstate. Subject to your questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Winnie? Questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Winnie.
Chairman Burkhart and committee, thank you so much for allowing me to testify. Mark Tesoro from Southwest Wyoming Off-Road Trails in Evanston. Since I presented to the committee last summer in Rawlins, the communities of Evanston, Lyman, Mountain View, Kemmer, LaBarge, Marbleton, and Big Piney have all signed ordinances to move this project forward to allow ATVs and side-by-sides on city streets with the $15 off-road sticker. We have had a very good partnership and relationship with the communities. They have been very supportive of this project in order to bring riders into the communities for some economic development benefit. Senator Dockstetter, Senator Schuler, Representative Heiner, Senator Kolb, Senator Baldwin, Representative Ayer have all been to many of the public meetings, county commission and city council meetings that we've had. Forrest Kaminga from State Trails and Director Reiner from WYDOT and his leadership team have been on board with the project since almost day one. Again, this is an economic development project for the region, and we're trying to bring people into the state to ride these vehicles. Just a real quick on a couple of the questions I did hear earlier, and not to step on WYDOT's toes, but when I took Senator Schuler and Senator Dockstetter to look at the project, next to the start of this trail system would be at the end of a frontage road that is owned by the county. And that there's about 50 feet between the interstate and that frontage road. From there, it would go on dirt. And in some places there are up to 100 yards or so between the highway and that right-of-way fence. As far as the width of the trail, that would be up to state parks, but probably no wider than enough to pass a couple of ATVs that way. So I think that's all for my comments in there. I think there's some people online that have lined up as well. Chairman.
Any question, Representative Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in your discussions with the cities that have passed ordinances, have you brought up the issue that WYDOT posed about the insurance and the issues related to that? Because it does kind of pose a question to me in my mind. If I'm a personal vehicle and I'm smashed by one of these ORVs, I mean, where does that leave me?
Absolutely. So that is,
I'm sorry, please.
Chairman Burkhart, Representative Baker, absolutely. I think that's why the language was put in there about insurance. I think the chief of police from Evanston is lined up to testify as well. So he could maybe also speak about that.
Any other questions? Representative Stiver.
Thank you, Chairman. In that area between Painter Road and Evanston, I mean, is the right-of-way fence the right-of-way, or does WYDOT own more? Do you know that? And how much construction have you taken out, the hills and stuff that's in the way? Is that going to be?
Sure. Chairman Burkhart.
Tesoro.
Chairman Burkhart, Representative Stiver. Again, I think that's kind of an engineering decision, but we're not talking about paving this. This is designed for vehicles that want to be ridden on dirt. So as far as the right-of-way fence, I did have an engineering firm out of Evanston look at it, and then I think the WYDOT engineers also looked at it, and I believe that is the right-of-way fence.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Tesoro. Amanda, how many people do we have online who want to speak?
Mr. Chairman, currently we have Mark Anderson who's raised his hand.
He's
I
a
have
county
allowed
commissioner.
the chief police of Evanston in, and then Charles Garrity from Knoxville, Tennessee
Correct.
is in. We have one other individual who has not raised their hand.
Okay.
So if they would like to testify, please raise your hand and I'll move you in.
Okay, I will take the chief of police first then. Thank you.
Thank you, committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, but we can't see you.
Oh. Do not know what's going on with my camera here.
But we can hear you, so why don't you continue?
Yes, sir.
There you go, chief, you're on.
Thank you, sir. Obviously, they've asked me to speak about this. We have met as law enforcement, and full disclosure, I am a member of the committee for the Southwest, and I have participated in this from the beginning. The city of Evanston passed an ordinance back in 2020 permitting these vehicles to be enrolled in the state trails, and they have not yet. We're waiting on the final point, which is connecting our community to the trails, this 3.5 mile stretch. Long ago, the state of Wyoming allowed motor vehicles of this nature to be operated on a multi-purpose vehicle plate. The riders, you see them more in the summertime. They have been mature. They've been responsible. We have had no significant law enforcement issues. And with the proposed changes to the bill, including insurance, horns, and a rearview mirror, I don't foresee any significant issues whatsoever.
Chief, any questions for Chief Renish? Okay, Chief, I do have one. Are you responsible for patrolling or policing that area?
No, sir. Our responsibility ends at approximately milepost 6, where the interstate leaves the city of Evanston.
Okay, thank you. Okay, question? Chief, thank you very much. Appreciate your patience.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Amanda, whoever you have next.
Mark Anderson's next, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. You can hear me okay?
Yes, and we can see you.
Great, okay. I don't know if that's beneficial, but I'm here. So thank you for your time. I just wanted to hop on real quick. Again, Mark Anderson, Uintah County Commissioner here in Uintah County. I just want to urge the support from Uintah County for this bill. From the start 2 years ago, the working group that started this has just been outstanding to work with. All the stakeholders involved, the State Trails Program, Director Reiner and his team, to get to this point has been great. And I just want to echo our support. And we know that this isn't going to be a fix-all economic fix for Uintah County or for Wyoming, but it's yet a tool in our toolbox as we look to diversify our economy that I think is important to do. And so I just want to thank you for your time, and I will yield for questions.
Any questions for Commissioner Anderson? Any questions? Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Who else, Amanda?
Mr. Chairman, we have Charles Garrity.
Okay.
And if you just unmute yourself, please.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman and committee, thank you for the opportunity to let me speak. We've been coming out for about 15 years, riding in your neighboring states. We're hoping to do that in the state of Wyoming as well. We will normally come out for a week to 2 weeks. We do anywhere from 500 to 1,000 miles. We like to stop at the different little towns and the mom and pop motels and eateries. We need gas, groceries, and by you guys getting this going, that will give us the opportunity to do that. I'm watching it anxiously and hope we get that chance in the near future.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Garrity? Okay, no questions. Thank you, Mr. Garrity, very much. And thank you for enjoying our wonderful state.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, committee? Well, hold on. Anyone else from the public wish to speak? And I'll give you about 2 minutes because we've got about 1 minute till we have to go back in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ben Hornock, Precinct Committee Man for Laramie County. I represent the people of the west part of Laramie County. Just a little curious, maybe I've gotten the wrong impression on this bill at first, but my only concern is that this spills over into some of the other highways and byways in the state of Wyoming. I understand there's an issue with operating a off-road vehicle around an 80-mile-an-hour freeway, but there's a whole lot of ranchers and the ag portion of this state that uses these roadways quite a bit to check cows from one plot of land to another. So I'm just worried that eventually this is going to spill over into hindering their ability to do that. But I understand the need for this in a 3.5-mile stretch, and I just hope this problem isn't solved with a Wyoming-sized sledgehammer to solve a 3.5-mile problem. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Hornock? Questions? No, thank you very much. Thank you for your patience waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keith Kennedy on behalf of the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. We had actually heard from several of our districts in the area, and their concern is the damage that's been done to private property expressed to those local boards. And their question would be, is this encouraging illegal behavior on private property? And with that, I'd welcome your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? Committee, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, we have our last one online.
Okay.
If you turn on his video and his microphone, Mr. Bill Tech.
Afternoon, folks. I'm primarily going to speak on Fossil Butte National Monument. We're trying to incorporate that into the trail system. I've been involved with the trail system for over a year now. And just to focus on that Fossil Butte National Monument, we can get on trails over off of Highway 89 north of Evanston, go over the mountain and drop down onto US 30 across the road, US 30, and then onto Fossil Butte National Monument. You get on that road, you can go up our Dempsey Ridge, so many historical areas there, and you can go on to our mountain trail, Bridger Teton National Forest up to Alpine. And then we can cross over into the trail system, the Caribou Trail system in Idaho. And, essentially it connects northeast Utah, western Wyoming, and southeast Idaho. But we've had a couple of meetings with National Park Service, and we've kind of hit a bump in the road, but we've got support. Senator Dockstetter has been at both of the meetings that we've had in person. And of course, we have support of Senator Schuler and Representative Heiner. We've also had letters from Senator Barrasso, Senator Loomis, and Representative Cheney that have gone to the Park Service. And we're hoping to get Utah and Idaho on board with that. And, I'll echo what Chief Ranish said, that, we absolutely have all of our streets involved in this, but again, it's with the either licensed vehicle or the ORV sticker, and all the laws apply. So, you know, I know that you guys are pressed for time, so I really won't keep you. But, you know, the communities here, the town of Diamondville, city of Kemmer, Cokeville, all of us here that are involved absolutely support this bill.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Okay, committee? Okay, moved by Henderson, seconded by Burt. Discussion? Well, I do have some discussion. I will be a very strong no on this bill. To me, this is a disaster waiting to happen. We have demands on the right of ways as it is right now. We have fiber optics. We have someone who wants to put water lines in, bicycle trails. These are interstate highways that are set aside for that use. And I'll just be blunt about it. This is a recipe for disaster as far as I can see. I would recommend that state parks, who had the opportunity to speak but didn't, look at purchasing access if need be. That would be my answer to all of that, rather than bring them onto the interstate. So Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in principle, I want to say I support this strongly, but I think it's better, since it's a new thing, that we start with limited, that address the things that the chairman just mentioned, but also limit it to the 3.5 miles that already been identified in the area that we know about, right? And then anything going forward, I think we have to talk about that once we know the way forward clearer.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Question being called. Diana, would you take roll, please?
Representative Baker. Representative Burt. Representative Henderson.
No.
Representative Overmuller.
No.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Stivar.
No.
Chairman Burkhart.
No.
And Representative McGuire submitted an absentee ballot for aye.
Okay.
So we have 4 ayes and 4 noes.
Oh, the bill dies on a tie vote. Thank you. I need to take care of paperwork stuff, but I think all of you are needed on the floor.